Okay.
Ready?
We're all set.
We all set, folks? Members of council, Mr. Mayor, staff, and the public, we are here. I call this meeting to order and declare a quorum. Item 2 is the adoption of the agenda. Moved by Councillor King, and that the agenda for the January 8th, 2018 special meeting of Committee of the Whole be adopted. Any changes, additions? Hearing none, all in favor? So moved. 3, are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest in, Mr. Mayor, any of this? Nobody?
No, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. All right, item 4, we'll move into a presentation of the 2018 capital and operating budget, and I presume at this point I will turn it over to Madam Treasurer.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to be here tonight to present the 2018 operating and capital budgets. I'll start off with the operating budget first. I would like to do the presentation, and then I will open it up for questions from council, and then move on to the capital budget, if that is okay with you, Mr. Chair.
That's fine.
So the agenda, there's an overview, 2018 operating revenues, the 2018 operating expenditures, the tax levy proposed increase, the Pelham Community Center, and capital budgets. So on the overview, the 2018 budget plan is focused on delivering services and programs to the community that fulfill the town of Pelham's mission of providing a superior quality of life to its residents. This vision for the municipality is to be the most vibrant, innovative, and caring community in Niagara. And that's an important statement because that's what the budget is based on. The 2018 strategic plan, council and senior members of the senior team met in September to update the strategic plan, and these are the goals and objectives that came from that. So the strategic goals that are built into the budget are 1, build stronger neighborhoods and community, 2, communicate positively, 3, maintain focus on our goals and objective, 4, better manage risk, 5, protect people and property, and 6, grow and manage the town's financial well-being. These are the goals for next year. The objectives, 1 is to embrace the principle of smart growth in the East Fenwick and zoning bylaw by the end of 2018. Complete the Pelham Community Center on time and on budget. Right now it's scheduled for a substantial completion on June the 1st of 2018, and right now we're on budget and on time for that project, which is exciting. Clear up public misconceptions about what we do by the end of the first quarter in 2018. Develop a risk management framework by the end of 2018, and complete the capital asset plan. So these are the objectives for the 2018. Challenges and opportunities. So the challenges and opportunities that we have, 1 is the cash position. All the spending in 2018 will come from in-year cash received. There's going to be, we have timing issues, as we know from the cash, that we have funds that, we have timing issues of cash coming from developers, $7.8 million in the future, and we're looking at possibly debt issuance in 2019. But for 2018, it's going to be cash in year. There's no long-term debt to be issued in 2018. We are looking at short-term borrowing right now for the construction bridging for the Pelham Community Center, and this is to tie us over with the land sales. So whatever borrowing we take in year will be paid off within 2018, because the anticipation is that the land will sell and we can repay back the construction bridge loan. This graph I thought would be helpful. This is a monthly operating cash flow, and what this does is it actually shows the peaks and valleys of how the cash is received. So the 2017 is the blue, and so the peaks obviously is when we receive the property taxes, and so that's why it's important for the town, as we have an operating line of credit to help us with the peaks and valleys. And it's not just our town, it's all municipalities that do that as well. The big peak here in 2016 was that a debenture of over $5 million was issued, and you can see how the cash just spiked. So in 2019. When we do take out some debentures, you'll see the cash spiking as well. So this is important. We spend a lot of time monitoring cash flow. Charlotte and I, just to make sure that that we can cover the peaks and valleys that we have. Also reserves and deferred revenue, $3.2 million is the in-year reserve transfer to capital this year. Land sales, as we're looking at the sale for East Font Hill, almost 19 acres of land, which we know will go directly to fund the community center. We have the remnant land of Well Springs and land and the arena lands also that'll be sold this year. And the Pelham Community Center, what's exciting about this is that the projected costs for 2018 are below the original pro forma. Operating revenues. So this is a helpful chart. Okay, sorry, this is the wrong, this one didn't show up because the categories are missing on this one. Anyways, sorry about that. I think it's in your presentation. You can actually see the categories in there. There's the majority of the revenue comes from the property taxes, and then these are the other categories here. So I think I've got the wrong presentation here. Did you want me to switch over, Nancy? Because it's this is not.
That was the one that was in that file.
No, but is this is the PowerPoint or is it the?
I think that's the PowerPoint.
Yeah, no, it needs to be the other one. Sorry, that's okay. So we'll just do a quick minute switch over so we can actually read the categories. That's okay.
I thought it was the PowerPoint one.
Hmm?
This one? Or this one?
There's a presentation report, did you see
They're
that?
both PDFs.
This one.
This one?
No, it's not in the book. It's on here. Can you show them how to get that maybe?
No, I'm getting it. All right, should come up.
There you go.
It's a separate, no, it's a
Okay, I
separate.
just need to do the
What over there for? I got it on the screen.
view full screen mode. There we are. Okay, that's a little bit better.
This is
So as you can see here, you can see that 83.1% of the total revenue of the town is property taxes, and then you have the other revenues, building permits, facility rentals, there's supplementals. So there's not a lot, and that's what's tough about this budget, is because a big portion of it is dependent on property taxes. This is the breakdown of the major revenues that we just saw in the diagram form. So these are the numbers that correspond to that. The operating budget net increase. So right now, what we have from 2017 budget, we had $14.5 million of expenditures, and we're proposing $15.6 million of expenditures, so $1.1 million of an increase. The non-tax revenues is about a $238,000 increase. A big portion of that pertains to the Pelham Community Center and new revenues that we're going to be receiving from the community center. And then there's a taxation revenue increase, of which $326,000 of the taxation revenue increase comes from new assessment growth in 2017. So these are new property taxes that have come on board, but it's 2.77%. So the actual proposed increase is 5% to the existing residences. Summary of the increases in the budget, and some of the categories have a bit more detail, and we'll go into that. One, there's an increase in staffing for the PCC and other staffing for the town, and that's $631,000. We have the breakdown of that number. There's a principal payment of the demand bridge loan. We've been paying off the interest, but now we're starting to pay off the principal. Contracted services, I have a breakdown of what makes up that number. Increase in some of the utility costs, which also includes the Pelham Community Center, and then other increases in materials and supplies. So those are the total increases. There's also, this is offset by an increase in revenues that are not property taxes. So a big chunk of this is the community center, and then this is the increase in the growth of new property taxes. And that's where we come down to the net amount that needs to be funded by a property tax increase of almost $590,000. Operating expenditures. So the operating expenditures, A big portion of that pertains to transportation services, which really are our roads. And that's 48% of the budget goes to that. Protection services, the fire services, that's about 10%. Corporate services is 12%. Clerks 3%. General government 7%. The library is 5%. Planning and development 6%. Recreation and cultural services 8%. And the cemeteries are just 1%. So that's just a really good visual to see how the operating expenses and where they're being spent by the department. This diagram here shows the categories of where the revenues are, and so you can actually see, transfer to reserves about 20%, contracted services 8.9, benefits 9.6, wages 35.5. So the largest portion of our expenditures pertain to wages, which is normal in a municipality. And then these are the other categories here. So this just helps you to understand where the expenses are for the town to provide the programs and services. These are the numbers that support the diagram. So salary and benefit increases. So we've got right now, this is the breakdown of that number we saw before, the 631. So there's a merit increase of 2%. Benefits increase, 42,000. The good news, I just heard from Paula today, that actually that's going to be a decrease. So that number's coming off the 42,000 we just heard today, that they're actually going to be decreasing our benefits. So that's good news. So we'll be adjusting the budgets going down by 42,000. We won't need that number. There's some new complements of 173,000. We'll talk about that in detail. The Pelham Community Center staff, which is offset by revenue of 187,000. Some overtime increase. This is not new overtime. We've always incurred this, but we haven't budgeted for it properly. Parks summer students, minimum wage increase of 21,000, and there's some budget adjustments from last year's budget. So that's the total of the breakdown of the salaries and benefits. So the open house requests. In October, we opened up to the public to come and give us their budget requests. So what we have done here is we've summarized what people have requested, and I'll just go through and I just want to list what was requested and what the decision has been made right now with regards to what the public has requested. So the first one is Fond Hill Band Shell Concerts. They were asking for a tier placement of the amphitheater area and street closure for dancing. This is part of the 20-year forecast for Peace Park redevelopment, but it's not in 2018. We are looking at putting in some permanent fencing in 2018, which will enhance the Thursday night experience. Pickwick Place, there's street light replacement with looking at with the existence of the height of 11-foot poles, not 25-foot poles. This is the request. And there'll be a report coming to council which will talk about the Pickwick Place. Economic development plan and economic incentives for small businesses in Pelham. There is an incentive program already exists with the community improvement program. The economic development plan is started by council, and they will provide further direction. So there is something in place. Splash pads in the parks. There is a water feature that's been identified in the public square for East Font Hill. That won't happen in 2018, but it will in the near future. There could be a splash pad in the park area of the old arena. We're just looking at that, if that could be part of the redevelopment of that area. So that's just a possibility there. The next one is the Pelham Minor Baseball. They're requesting lighting in the Harold Black Park, and that right now has been earmarked for 2019. Sulphur Springs and Poth Street. Engineering study in 2018 for Sulphur Springs and Poth Street is in 2019. Roads, traffic calming, street line painting, at least in the urban limits of the town. This is part of the engineering design manual. Safety with regards to speeding, that's once again is part of the engineering design manual, so it's being looked at. Customer service, how do we better utilize the PSR system? That's the public service request system, and we are working with Ian Lucas, who developed the system, to see how we can better communicate the status of these requests. Global view of the budget, finish what we have started. This is what I think some council members have mentioned. You know, it's time for us to finish all the projects, and so the Pelham Community Center is one of them, which will be finished this year. Complete East Fenwick, area lands, develop strong reserve policy, and develop sustainability as we go forward. So this is part of the 2018 strategic plan. So we are going to focus on all that. Communication, clear and positive. This is part of the 2018 strategic plan, so it's been incorporated. Expand Love My Hood program, part of the 2018 interdepartmental team plan, so that's ongoing. Ridgeville Hamlet should be planned and removed from the greenbelt. The drainage improvement in 2018, the planning department is following up on that. Okay, so there's a few more. Street lighting, look at replacing the lights with LED. This is part of the 20-year plan, but we're also looking at grants to see if we can get some grants that will help us replace the LED lights sooner rather than later. Trees, consider an increase in the number of trees. Right now it's not in the 2018 budget, but well, it's just earmarked for us to look at it in the future. Staffing for PCC should be covered by new revenues. It is. Maintain the infrastructure. This is ongoing, and the Niagara Airport needs $173,000 in capital, of which 1/3 is Pelham's portion. This right now is outstanding since we're waiting to see if the airport will be uploaded to the region. So this is where we stand with the open house requests. Contracted services increase. This is one of the line items. So we have winter control is increased by $82,000. Fire radio support. The good news there is that the City of St. Catharines has purchased the new radios on behalf of the municipalities, and the municipalities are paying that back. I think it's over a 10-year period, and they're not charging us interest, which is good that we don't have to have, I think it's like $300,000 of an outlay of cash. So it's so that's this year's portion of that. Engineering, there is some additional work in engineering, facilities and beautification, building and others. So that's the total of some contracted services increase. Proposed full-time staffing. So it's just a little bit hard to read there, but I think you've got the packages. And I'm going to hand this over to our Director of Human Resources to talk about that. Yeah. Okay.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I just want to give you an opportunity to understand a little bit of the staffing changes and the requests that we're making at this meeting today. So some of it is just some shifts in staffs, and some of it are actually staffing requests. So if we look at our CAO's office, you'll see that our full-time complement in 2017 is 2, and we're going to see a reduction in that in 2018 down to 1. That's not an elimination of a position. What it is that we have seconded, or we'd like to second our executive assistant into a health and safety coordinator role for 2018. And to give you some insight into that, is in 2016, our Health and Safety Committee had recommended that the town have an audit done. So we worked with WSPS, and we had an internal audit done to see how we were as far as legislative requirements go in meeting occupational health and safety standards. They came back with an audit that has a lot of work. There's definitely a lot of work and a lot of meat that we need to get our hands around. One of the recommendations, though, is that we did assign someone the task of sort of overseeing this very large project. Since that time, we have been chipping away at this audit and getting a lot of stuff done, so there has been some improvements in departments, and we're getting there. However, what we realized in 2018 is we had this wonderful opportunity when we had a couple of different staffing requests come through. And I just want to be very cautious with what I'm saying now, because it's about identifiable individuals, so I'm going to sound a little covert, but I don't mean to be. But we had some staffing requests come through that allowed us this opportunity to use our current executive assistant, Martha Tosher, in a role that she has studied for. So Martha, before coming to the town of Pelham, held the role of occupational health and safety coordinator with the city of Port Colborne. So we're going to be able to capitalize on her knowledge. We're going to be able to put her into this special project for a year's time, get the audit where we need it to be so that we can just take it and continue running. And then after the project's done, she would be put back into her role. So working with our CAO and our mayor, we talked about how can we make sure that they still get some good coverage without putting too much of a financial burden onto the town. And again, as I was mentioning, some other things fell into place that allowed us to fill it with a part-time position. So we're going to bring forward someone who's very seasoned and in this role, and we think that's going to be able to do a great job in the role. And so we would like to move forward with that. In addition to that, I'd like to also comment that the position that Martha will be fulfilling, you'll see that her headcount has moved down into human resources. So you'll see the full-time special placement of a +1. So the position's going to report up through human resources, but our town clerk, Nancy Bizzato, is our chair of our Occupational Health and Safety Committee, and she's really spearheaded this audit, and she wants to see this through to the end. So the 80% of the job that Martha does is working with Nancy and our Occupational Health and Safety Committee, getting the audit requirements done, and about 10 to 20% will be working in human resources related functions that also align with the work that they're doing on the audit. So I see Martha doing things like helping really solidify our short-term disability program and our WSIB program. So that's sort of where we see this going. We think it fits in very nicely with the strategic plan for 2018 because it really fits into the reducing the risk and protecting people and property in the town. Nancy, if I may turn it over to the town clerk, this is a lot of her spearheading, so I don't want to misspeak. So I want to just turn it over to Nancy if you wanted to add anything.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the Health and Safety Committee has been working diligently to work through this WSPS audit. They don't have all of the expertise and the training to be able to accomplish all of the tasks on their own, so they are very supportive with this proposal to have an individual who is educated and very knowledgeable in this area to help us get all of our health and safety policies and procedures in full compliance.
Thank you. Okay, so it's continuing. So no changes in the clerk's department, no changes in our community planning and development department. In our corporate services department, you'll see that their full-time headcount went down by 1, and it's been offset by 2 part-time increases down at the bottom. We had an opportunity where a long-term employee has asked to change her status and go down to permanent part-time. We've decided to make the shift. The director decided to make the shift and allow the position to become a permanent part-time position. And as such, we've split the job into 2. We've created another position. So the net to the town will actually be a savings because we will see a savings in benefits. And then we'll also see some additional support go to other departments within corporate services, specifically to our IT department. Fire services remains the same. Human resources, I already mentioned, there'll be that special placement. Public works, so some changes in public works. So we see an addition of 3 heads in public works. So we are making the recommendation that we add a full-time supervisor, so supervisor of facilities. You all have the PowerPoint document, correct? If you go 2 slides down, you'll see the organizational chart. That'll kind of give you an example. I just don't want to lose my place on the slide. So you'll see that we're requesting a supervisor of facilities, full-time person, a full-time custodian, and a full-time facilities rental associate. So the rental associate, I hope you'll recall, over a year ago, we had taken that position out of recreation, RCW. It was the RCW admin position, and we had temporarily shifted it over to Public Works because we were moving the rentals over to facilities. So now that we're sort of nearing our end, we need to start making some permanent changes. Now we're making that permanent request for the addition of that head count. So RCW would get their admin headcount back, and we're asking for the increase of that 1 head so that we can keep that booking position. The one thing that we've recognized is that booking facilities, which includes all of our ballparks and soccer fields and the 2 arenas when they come on and things like that, there's a lot involved in booking. So I know when we hear about that, and our natural tendency is to say, is that really required for a full-time position? And I can tell you that there's so much involved with scheduling and making sure that these go off okay, and according to our renters' expectations, that we have created as many efficiencies as we can in this role. And I would absolutely say to you that yes, this position is required in order to make sure that we're meeting our renters' expectations. So those are the 3 asks that we ask for this year, for full-time complement, permanent full-time complement, I should clarify. So fixed term, full-time, we are asking for 2. So again, if you recall, way back in 2015, when we put together our staffing numbers that were ultimately put into the pro forma, one of the things that we worked on was coming up with a usage schedule. So we determined the use of the 2 ICE facilities and what would be minimum staffing requirements, medium staffing requirements, and maximum staffing requirements. So when we had peak times going, for instance, if we had our junior Bs would be considered peak, we'd have lots of people in the building, et cetera, et cetera. So using those staffing models, I was able to break down how many hours we would need for a facilities operator. I'm sorry, Nancy, I tend to wander. How many hours we would need for facilities operators and their corresponding rink attendants, which are our part-time students. So for that, we need 196 hours a week for facility operator positions, and the only way we can do that is by bringing on 2 additional full-time people. I am very cautious with bringing on full-time staff, especially in this first partial year, because we want to see how this goes, which is why I am recommending that we bring them on in a fixed-term contract position, because we don't know if our current staff can eventually absorb it or what the needs will be. So I'm requesting that we bring it on as in a fixed-term capacity. Okay, so that's those 2 asks right there. Public Works part-time, our part-time staff request goes from 4 to 9. So I am making the recommendation that we bring on 5 permanent part-time evening custodian staff. And again, this would be to take care of our PCC. So we'll be bringing on 5 part-timers at a maximum number of hours of 20 hours a week, because it allows us that flexibility to look at the schedule for the week ahead and determine, do we need to bring in 2 custodians to work to clean our building, or is it expected to be a busy night because we have a hockey game, plus we've got a stag and doe going on, and we need to blitz it and bring in all 5. So I'm asking for a number of 5 with a maximum number of hours of 20 hours a week in order for us to have that flexibility, in order to keep the facility clean and make sure that overnight we're getting a good cleaning done. Okay, so our fixed term part-times, I know that sounds like a bit of a fancy term, but really what that just comes down to is our rink attendants, and this is the summer students that work in our parks. So I'm requesting an additional 3 rink attendants. We currently usually hire 5. I'd like to hire 8. Again, just to keep their work hours between 12 and 15 hours a week, because again, these are all students typically under the age of 18, and we do know that they have school to still go to. And then the additional 3 would be for our parks, which was on the other slide. It was that 38,000. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to bring on, so we have a budget for 7. I'd like to bring on 10, but I'd like to bring on 5. We typically only bring them on May 5th until Labor Day. I'd like to bring 5 on earlier than that. I'd like to bring 5 on April 1st to October 31st, because as we know, for instance, this fall was very, very warm, and we were still working on flower beds and mowing lawns up and through October when all of our seasonal staff was gone, and it puts a large burden on our staff. So I'd like to up that complement in order to make sure that we're still able to maintain all of our outside work. And in addition to that, we can't rely on our facility staff to help back us up, because they're going to be working in our PCC. So I'd like to just boost that number up a little bit. RTW shows an increase from 4 to 5, but that's really just to put them back where they belong, because as I had mentioned, we kind of borrowed their head to see how that was going to work. Now it's just really giving them their head back. So we are requesting, and I realize, and I apologize that my math is wrong, because while it says our permanent head count is going up 3, and I am asking for 3 new heads of the supervisor, the facilities attendant, or the facilities booker, and the custodian, it really only goes up by 2 because of the change in our corporate services department, which got rid of 1 permanent head count and split it into 2 part-times. Okay. So everything I just said was written in the second slide that you also have. And then, as I had mentioned, what I would like to call out, and I did make a note on here, that this wasn't my full staffing request. This wasn't my full staffing request, and I just kind of wanted to call that out in that, 2 years ago when we started this project, and, one of our mandates that were put to us by council was that we make sure that this beautiful facility remain beautiful and remain welcoming and open and things like that. So we did make a change, and it's a change that we needed to make because, again, in the year that we're in, we want to make sure that our staffing is done intentionally and slowly and with the right decisions in mind. However, I do want to point out that there's a whole other side that I'll probably want to be adding in 2019, and it's those people that just help with things like room setup. So when we do have weddings or meetings and things like that, and somebody needs 200 chairs set up in a classroom setting, that we have this sort of staff to help do this general labor around this building as well as outside and supporting the events that we have out there. So there's another piece that you're not being showed to, but I just wanted to highlight that some changes have already been made in order to make sure that this was an appropriate staffing request to bring forward to council tonight.
Mr. Chair,
All right.
if I might, so that should be 64, not 65, is that correct on that?
That is correct.
On
For
that
a full-time
total?
complement, yes.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. The tax levy proposed increase,
Mr. Chair, point of order.
Go ahead.
Are we proposing to go through this whole presentation, then go back over it with questions, or do we
Yes.
want to, that's the way you want to do it?
I'll leave it to the discretion of
it's
council.
up to you. Do you want to ask questions
wait?
now?
No.
Well, there's going to be an awful lot of them when we get to the end.
What's that?
There's going to be a lot of questions when we get to the end,
Okay.
and we'll have to
so-
go back. So it's up to you, your pleasure. I just want to understand
No, it's
where.
not my, it's up to you as a group. If you feel that you want to start, we can ask questions
Yeah,
now.
we
And
can.
instead of trying to pile them all up, if you want to start, I'm open to that. If all of you are in agreement?
I think there's only a couple more slides. Mr.
I don't know.
Chair.
What have you got left?
Then go back.
Finish operating maybe and then go back?
Well, that's what I was hoping, that we'd
Yeah.
finish operating,
Yeah.
ask questions regarding
Stop
operating.
at operating, and then we'll go back into
And then we'll
detail.
go back and then
Yeah.
do capital afterwards, all right?
Yeah.
So why don't you finish that off and
Stop
we'll
and
then
then-
come back to operating.
Yep. The tax levy proposed increase. So the increase here that we talked about earlier is the 5% increase. What does that mean to the average residential household? That's equivalent to $78.76 a year in increase. This is just here a summary of the year-over-year assessment changes from 2017 to 2018 in the various categories. So you can see where the changes have happened. As you recall, in 2016, there was impacted reassessment of property taxes, and the assessment increases are being implemented over a 4-year period. So 2016 was the first year, 2017, and now just as 2018 is the next year. The assessment growth is, for 2017, is 2.7, and you can see where the growth is happening. There's, the commercial occupied is up by almost 12%. There, residential is almost up 3%. So there's the different categories of changes from 2017. So this is so now this is rolled into the 2018 assessment. I'm not going to go through this in detail. I just wanted, as part of the presentation, I presented this at the open house. I think what's important here, and people do always ask the questions, where do my property taxes go? And this is an average home assessed value. We use the 2017 value, which means that for a home at $316,000 assessed valued, it's about $4,100 in property taxes. What portion belongs to the town, the region, and the school boards, and it shows you here that only 38% belongs to the town, 14% goes to the school boards, and then 48% goes to the region for the services that they provide. And just a quick visual here, you know, how does the town use its portion? And the biggest part, as we saw before in the pie graph, where the roads, sidewalks, and winter control is the largest portion that the funds are used for. And then there's the fire services, and so that's just a good visual to see, you know, where do my property taxes go? And then that's the breakdown in the numbers, if you want to look at it in detail. The interesting one as well, because 48% of your taxes do go to the region, and where does the region use their money? And the biggest part for them are the police services is the biggest one, and the regional roads and waste management. So that's where taxes go to support those services. And that's the region's numbers. Just a quick slide here, just to remind everyone that the town of Pelham is still the second lowest of cumulative tax increases in the last 10 years with all the other municipalities. That's just a slide there, just to show you that. The Pelham Community Center, so we're getting near the end. You can't read that slide right there, but what I just want to show here is in the first column, I think you have it on your screen, is the original pro forma for the 12-month period, which showed 101,261 of a deficit. What we're looking at now in the first 6 months, so in the 2018 year, we're only going to have 6 months of operations because the community center will be finished on June the 1st, and we're looking at about a $49,000 surplus to the community center. And that's it. I'm going to stop here.
All right, we'll
can
stop
open it up
there,
to
and
questions.
now
Yeah,
we'll
that's it.
turn it over to members of council to ask questions about the 2018 operating budget. Councilor Ribbiak?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have questions in a few areas, but maybe I'll just ask in one, then maybe you can come back to me later for
By all means.
others as you have it. I'd like to get some clarity, if I can, with regard to the HR budget. I think what I was hearing is that an awful lot of the positions we were talking about, part-time, fixed part-time, various areas, at various hours, had to do with the community center. And I think that our presumption is that other than, at the end of the day, the budgeted deficit, the additional manpower, person power required by the community center would be offset by revenues. But the presentation combined all positions across the town. So it's very, very difficult for me at this point to kind of differentiate between those positions which are earmarked for the community center against the others, and I really would like to see some separation of those. I can understand the logic, I think, at a granular level, but I want to see it more at the larger scale. How many of these positions are actually being covered by projected revenues, and therefore are justified on the basis of their need within the community center, as opposed to some more generalized need that we never had before, and therefore is difficult to compare. So I don't know, obviously can't do that now, but maybe for further discussion as we get to the decision-making stage, we can break that out and have some clarity around that. I would really like to have a grasp of that before saying yay or nay with respect to that part of the human resources presentation. There's more about the human resources presentation, but maybe we just want to address that part before we move on.
Any others to that point as well? Mr. Mayor?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just, I'd like to kind of underscore or understand, I guess, better what the director, treasurer just said, because although there's a number of changes that are being proposed here, how does this relate to the budget that council saw back in 2016? My understanding from what the treasurer just said is that it's actually better. And I'm looking for the slide here, sorry. that
The last slide.
the last slide of that, it had been proposed that it was a net deficit of $100,000. We currently spend more than $100,000 on the existing arena to operate it. And this is actually working out for 6 months, now it is a 6-month number, to be actually a surplus of $49,000. So, so all of these changes, I mean, there's the revenues there, and you have to get the revenues, but you need people to do the work to get the revenues, and that's my understanding. So I don't know if staff, Mr. Chair, can comment further, but, you know, we're gonna stay within this, within this target is what I'm hearing.
Madam Treasurer?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. If you look at the staff changes in the area under Public Works, you can see the positions that pertain to the community center. The numbers are listed there, and the dollars for that are incorporated in the Pelham Community Center budget. So did you want to see like the dollar values beside them?
So, if I may, Mr.
Well,
Chair.
Mr. Mayor, anything further on that?
No, I think maybe if staff can say that again and underscore it, that'd be helpful, but go ahead, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Say it again, Madam Treasurer, and then I'll turn back to, is there anybody else to that issue that both the mayor and Councilor Ribbiak, anybody else want to discuss?
Let's get the answer for that first.
Let's get the answer. Can you break down for us?
Okay, so, I'm sorry, question was which positions pertain to the Pelham Community Center that are funded but that are offset by increased revenues? And they're listed there, like those under the Public Works, the ones that pertain to the Pelham Community Center are included in the pro forma for the 2018, those new positions.
Councilor Ribbiak?
So the full-time facility supervisor is related to that. The rental associate is purely community centered, not beyond that. Here's my issue, Mr. Chair, if I may. We want to compare 2017 to 2018, apples to apples. 2018 is going to have a whole new element in it, and the numbers in it are very difficult to compare because we've got this mixture of HR addition that includes the Pelham Community Center, but also some other things. I want to talk, for example, about the health and safety position that we're creating. That's not related to the community center. So to compare one number to another when we've got this additional element in it is very difficult for me. I appreciate, and in fact, I'm thrilled that the expectation is that our deficit for the new community center is going to be better than the pro forma, and in fact is going to compare really, really well to our current requirement for the arena that we have. But I want to be sure that the positions that are being covered by those revenues are identified and are discrete from other positions that have existed up until now in previous budgets, so that we can look and determine whether budget increases in the other departments are because of activities that are occurring there and not in the in the community center. So that's the difficulty that I have. What we're presented with is a lot of positions. I'd just like to see some separation of those so I know what we're talking about. We've not only talked about the community center, we've talked about the gardening requirements that we have around the town after the end of the summer. That was included somewhere in this list. The health and safety person, as I said, there are some facilities and rental associates, other positions that will do work in other parts of the town other than the community center. So presumably there's some efficiencies there, some synergies that are going to be achieved, which is good. But it's right now very difficult for me to understand it. And I'm sure it's good, but I want to understand it.
I'll turn to other members of council. Let me try and frame this, and I shouldn't as chair, but no, I'll leave it. I think I know where you're going with all of this, but Councilor Christie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as I look at that last chart, it appears that we've added 16 people within the facilities area.
Some are part.
Probably most of them attributable to the PCC,
Most.
from what I can see there. And so, by my calculations, if I take a full year peek at the salaries and subtract the attributed payroll from existing, we've added something in the order of $500,000 in wages, from what I can see. Because the projected based on a half year is 702, so that's 1.4 million. And the attributable salaries already included in the operating budget is 477, so that's 955. Subtract the two, it's $500,000. And if we've added 16 people, that's 500,000 distributed over 16 people. So I guess the next question that I have is, have we looked at contracting out instead of hiring permanent part-time staff? Have we looked at contacting contractors who have all the appropriate equipment? They have the expertise already built in. We don't have to hire a superintendent or a supervisor to look after them because they're going to provide that within the contract. And I think in all fairness, to settle upon a modus operandi for that community center, that's something that we should be looking at to do a proper analysis of this.
Yeah, I'm going to pass this over to the Director of HR.
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Madam Director.
Yes, we absolutely did look at contracting out the custodial work. Custodians came in, contractors that we're looking at came in anywhere between $25 and $30 an hour, depending on if they're going to supply chemicals or not supply chemicals, et cetera, the quality of worker. Where we lose flexibility is our contractors could guarantee us, for example, 2 employees a week, and perhaps if we can estimate when's going to be a busy day, maybe on those days they would offer us 3 employees a week. But they need to do their hiring and know what their staffing looks like as well. Where we lose that flexibility is being able to look at our schedule on a week-to-week basis and determine when do we need to bring our people in. So we wouldn't be able to guarantee that after a Sunday afternoon game, we could bring in a bunch of people to clean because it was busier than we expected it to be. Right, so we lose that flexibility to call. Surely they would, but they're going to charge us a premium. So from a staffing and dollars perspective, this is where, in partnership with our Director of Public Works and our Facilities Manager, we talked that through. That what's best for the town, both from the dollar perspective as well as just the cleanliness of our building and maintaining it, would be to bring these people in as our own staff. And again, as I had mentioned, the staffing to bring in 5, to hire 5, is because we want to say to them, we're going to give you maximum 20 hours a week. And that gives us the flexibility to bring in 5 all at one shot, or perhaps 2, or if somebody's sick, it allows somebody to get extra hours without going into that precious overtime, right? So it allows us some flexibility to operate and still pay them the base salary. So these were all of the conversations that over the last 2 years we've been having to make sure that our staffing recommendation was appropriate.
Councilor Kersey.
I'll make a comment, and I'm not trying to offend anybody. It would have been very helpful had we seen the reorganization chart before we got to this budget meeting. It would have helped us with our comprehension of it. It would have helped us in having a discussion around these sorts of things. We could have seen reports regarding contracting out and how they would play it out. I think you want optimal flexibility. You don't hire anybody, you contract, you start going with your regular staff and you contract as you need it and see how the utilization is over the first year. And then you build around that as opposed to hiring up a whole bunch of people and then having to lay them off down the road. That's a personal opinion. You have obviously a different opinion, but.
And if I may, through you, Mr. Chair, that was actually something that we had talked about, because I know certainly in the prior years that I've been here, I've always presented the full staffing logic and reasoning behind it. It was late August with the onboarding of our new treasurer that we talked about, you know what, we're going to do it a little bit differently this year, and we're going to bring it all together. So this was a decision that we certainly all made and that we all supported, so I certainly can appreciate you seeing this for the first time, but it was a decision I think that we made as a team.
Well, I think it's contributed to the confusion and the somewhat reluctance to move forward on it, on this basis. I think if we'd have had the information ahead of time, it would have been helpful. That's a personal opinion. I'll relinquish the floor for now, Mr. Chair.
Anyone else to this? Mr. Mayor?
Thanks very much. Mr. Chair, one of the councilors talked about a number, I think he said 14, but that's not FTEs, full-time equivalents. And so I think having a number like that float out there might be taken the wrong way. So I think it's important to look at what's being proposed here. Some of it is part-time, as we heard. Some of them are this fixed rink attendance to see how that works. And then some of the other positions that are talked about, I think the director went through those, Mr. Chair. The director of HR went through the positions and the rationale why. Some of them are changes we made and testing things to see how it works. So, for example, the facilities rental associate, Councillor Ribiak wants to say, is that person definitely 100% for the Pelham Community Center? The answer is no, because, as the director said, they're going to be booking soccer fields and baseball diamonds and Old Pelham Town Hall and all of the different facilities as they do now, and they book the arena currently and the room upstairs, and so actually they're going to be getting probably a lot busier in terms of the rentals. So it's and no doubt they do other work as well. So it'll be, a change. So can you attribute all those dollars specifically for that person to the community center? No, but we do have that on this slide. But over here in the report, I think it's tab 11, and it was on the screen there, we do have the numbers that are attributed to the community center, and there they are, and it's to the good. So, as was said, it had been anticipated that it was a deficit of 100,000, and it's actually going to be what staff are suggesting. It's proposed a surplus of 50,000 for the first 6 months. Now, that will change and figure out, and we see that in year 2, it will be around that, and maybe the treasurer can comment as to why that is. So the original pro forma versus the projected, et cetera. But, I think council's concern should be around that, and we recognize that as we approved the community center, we knew that there would be a number of positions, and council's concern at that time was, well, we want to make sure that the dollar allocation wasn't that much more than what we are currently losing on the arena. And we concentrated at that time at that number, and we said that's the number. The number's better than we ever dreamed of for the first year, is what staff are proposing. And now we're going to say, well, how many is it and who is it and all that other kind of thing. So, we're trying to have it both ways here, Mr. Chair. I'm not trying to offend anybody, but I think the point is, that it's important to have the information, but at the same time, it's also important to get the work done in the community center, in the things that we've talked about. So I think that's what staff are proposing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Madam Director, and then we'll go to Councillor Ribiak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I may, and I think it might answer Councillor Ribiak's question, when all of these positions were put forward, especially the ones that aren't going to work specifically 100% in the community center, when these positions were put forward to our treasurer, again, in partnership with our Director of Public Works and Manager of Facilities, we did put in percentages of time. So again, when we look at our supervisor of facilities, it's not supervisor of PCC, it's supervisor of facilities. We have 21 facilities that this town owns and operates, so they're out and about doing all kinds of work. So it was through, again, studies and working through job descriptions and understanding what these roles would do, helped us determine what percentage of time could be attributed to the PCC, and therefore was new. And again, all of this was done in partnership with the treasurer, so she had these numbers when she put these numbers onto the calculations.
Thank you. Councilor Ribiak?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me just clarify. I think this is terrific. I think what's been presented about the community center is really great. I am not looking for two opposing things at all. What I'm looking for is some clarity around this. I am convinced, and I've just heard the director say it, so I'm convinced even more, that all the work has been done to justify all of the positions, that all the percentages to PCC versus the other have been determined for the various positions that are being offered. I just want to see that. I want to see it so that I can feel confident that if I'm supporting this budget, that I understand what it is that I'm supporting. Not that I'm opposed to it. I think it's terrific. There are a couple of positions that I would like to ask more about. But because many of the positions that we talked about were kind of PCC or PCC related, along with some others, I just need some clarification about that. And if nobody else has that requirement, that's fine. But that's certainly a requirement that I have. And if we can see that organization chart, or we can see how the percentages are broken out, then I can answer questions around. So what are we proposing in this budget? I'm certain that the budget numbers are good. I'm certain that the presentation is a good one. It wouldn't be anything else, but I do want some clarity around it.
Anything further? I'm not supposed to do this, but I will. I would look at this as a business model. I would forget about the 6 months. Just show us the revenues, the breakdown of the staffing, that which is part of the town, and that which is part of the new business entity, which would give us better definition and clarification over where are the new positions that are strictly dedicated to PCC, where are the positions that are, and I'm familiar with this from another work I used to do, what has been allocated to other parts of the municipal corporation. That's what I see as a consolidated, right? Is that what I'm seeing? Because there's salaries here that are obviously salaries that are part and parcel of public works, but there's also part of this salary group is exquisitely, or not exquisitely, dedicated
Yeah.
totally towards the
Yeah,
operation
there's
of the
certain
PCC.
percentages here, yes.
I think it would help us get our heads around
Yep.
what's it gonna, and I hate to use this, what's it gonna cost us to run this place with all the proper human resources, notwithstanding all the other operating expenses, hydro, benefits, everything like that. What is it going to be? And then it is also predicated on the fact, which is, I'm trusting, and we are trusting staff, that the projection of revenues will occur. That's what's going to happen, that will be, that we have a level of confidence that that's the case. And maybe that is probably where we were. And if those options, as Councillor Kersey mentioned too, if you did do those comparatives of using contracted services, I think it would have been helpful for us to see that before, and at least get some sense that that sort of analysis and diagnostic protocol was done. You know, that I'm not clear, you know, I guess I'm familiar with some charge 25, some charge 30, but the whole point boils down to, was that in the best interest of the PCC, not to contract out, but in fact to use our own internal staffing?
Okay, so we can bring that back.
I think you need to bring, we're not being, I should say, how can I say, destructively critical. We're trying to understand, because this is the largest operating project we ever have taken on, and we need to get a good handle on what exactly is going into this. So if that's a request, I don't know if other members of council feel, you know, like, I mean, the 6 months, that's great, but show us what this breakdown is of this 3.25 million. You give us gross numbers, which is fine, but what is the actual staffing? So how many are there? There 30 people in there? There's, 20 part-time, full-time. I think that would be extremely helpful to us.
Okay,
Is that fair to say? I think we need to see that.
we'll bring it back.
I think, through you, Mr. Chair, some granularity around this would be useful. Not to the nth degree, but
No, not to
just so
the
we
nth
can
degree.
understand what the head count is that's being covered by the revenue in the PCC, what is meant to provide service elsewhere to the town, and then, of course, what's happening to the budget with respect to
Right.
supporting the rest of the town.
Right.
Because that, too, is something that we have to be interested in. So just understanding that a little bit better would be very, very helpful to me.
So that would be, if you're all in agreement, direction to the treasurer and staff. Councillor Bain, go ahead.
Just on that note, Mr. Chair, is this not by itself an entity unto itself, the Fallon Community Center for all purposes? I think it is. I think from what I'm hearing with all the part-time and whatever, could this thing not be manned with totally part-time people? And then we know exactly what's going on and have people dedicated to this facility. There's more than, custodians and whatever. That's full-time job for custodians to look after that particular facility, whoever they might be. And I just think that, taking away planting flowers downtown or something different than running the community center. So I'm thinking the community center should be looked at unto itself and manning, and it should be kind of straightforward. That's the way I see it, because I think it's a major complex, and I think that it's going to take some people, and it would be nice if it could all be done with part-time people with no benefits and none of that type of thing. And I would just like to have it looked at that way, and then disregard the other areas of town and say, okay, this is what we're going to do, and strictly do that.
The two directors, if you want to respond, either one.
I'm going to take this through you, Mr. Chair. I absolutely agree. And again, when we go back to August of 2015, this was actually our first iteration of looking at the PCC. We looked at it very much as a freestanding, self-contained organization. As we looked at it, though, we recognized like our facilities operators, for example, are highly trained not only in running the ice facilities, but they're also trained in running our pool facilities and lining our baseball diamonds. So we've got some really, real expertise in people that to then limit them just to running ice and not doing their other work, the rest of our facilities would cost the town a lot of money. And again, the same thing with looking at, we started off by saying we wanted to have some sort of general manager just for the PCC. But then we recognized, again, it's really, while it's our flagship and something we're very proud of, it's another one of our facilities, where Old Palm Town Hall and our fire halls and this building also fall under the umbrella of our manager of facilities. So it is, I completely agree, our most important building that we have built, and it's something that we're going to really focus on. But when we looked at those calculations, we'd be doing a lot of redundant positions and then a lot of extra costs in order just to have that as a freestanding building. But that back in August of 2015, that was our first stab at it, was to see if we were going to run it independently.
Oh, by all means, yeah, you could.
I'm not sure.
Thank you, Madam Director. Mr. CEO, if you don't mind stepping in and helping us as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll come back with the information that's been requested. We'll update the performance. I understand what council's looking for, and we'll bring that information back. It's not a problem.
Terrific, thank you.
Okay, good. That would be extremely helpful. All right, moving on. Any other questions with the operating budget? Councilor Ribbiak.
Staying with positions, I just want to have some clarity around the safety and health reorganization that we're talking about. My understanding of this, and I've had some discussion with the HR director with regard to this, so this won't come as a surprise, I don't think. But we had some discussion around what it is that this position is meant to do on some sort of temporary basis, as I understand it. This is meant to be over a year,
Right.
I think, and that I believe that this position is around, I guess, completing work around a health and safety process. It's in the form of a question. Let me finish the question. That the responsibility in my mind, I think it is with most people, that the responsibility for health and safety is in the operating departments. It's the supervisors that are responsible for that. But what a corporation is meant to provide to supervisors is the program, the safety program, and this is where some centralized HR is required, heads as our HR director has said. So I just wanted to clarify that, in fact, what's happening here is that we are seconding an individual to complete the program, which will then be presented to the departments in order to implement in the same form that they would a quality program or any other policy that's there. It's not a case of the responsibility for health and safety being turned to an individual for the entire corporation.
Thank you, Mr. CEO.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To put it succinctly, the audit that was completed outlined a number of recommendations that the municipality should undertake in order to become compliant with the legislation. And there are areas where I'm not going to beat around the bush. There are areas that we are deficient, and that was made very clear in the audit. The way that you've described it is partially correct. But really what we're trying to do is we have the workplace health and safety team, we have the interdepartmental team, but we don't have an individual that can go and, as you say, coordinate that all together. So when we start talking about things like a deficiency around standard operating procedures in our public works department, we don't have an individual that has the time, let alone the resources, to go and start creating all of these standard operating procedures for turning on a truck, for changing oil, for doing an inspection, for doing this. We need the expertise of somebody to come in and establish that for us, and then it's picked up and maintained by the supervisors and the departments as required. So it's really laying the groundwork and taking the workplace health and safety function of the community up to where it needs to be. And then, yes, it would be the responsibility of the departments to maintain that and the supervisors. But unless we have a competent person in that role, to be able to guide the organization through the various requirements that the province has dictated we must follow, we just don't have the resources to do it, and that's our fear. And I think that this is a very great opportunity that we happen to have somebody in-house that has more than enough credentials for what we need to be able to second them for a period of time and then put them back into the position from where they came and accomplish the objective without having to hire, as some municipalities have done, a full-time workplace health and safety coordinator, which many municipalities have as a full-time position. We don't feel we need that, but we do need the expertise for a short period of time, establish the programs that we need to put into place with the processes, the protocols, the policies, etc. Get that up to the standard that meets the, that we knock off the things that were identified in our audit, get a well-placed workplace health and safety team, and then they can move forward in the future, and then that coordinating position can go back to where it came from. So that's an overview of what we're doing. I would say with certainty that the workplace health and safety issue is probably, it is the number one concern from my perspective on the organization. In order to keep our employees safe, that should be, and it is my number one concern. And I think that in order to do that and to fulfill that requirement, we need the expertise to be able to make that happen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think I'm hearing what I need to hear to help me understand that the position is a good one. This is not taking away the responsibility for health and safety from the line supervisors or the departmental heads. No. That the system, the program is what's going to be worked on, and unlike other organizations that may hire a contractor, for example, to come in and do all that stuff, we're going to do this in-house. So I'm happy with that. Thank you for that explanation.
Okay. Councillor Kersey.
Along those same lines, Mr. Chair, I've done a little bit of research and looking online, and not everything online is gospel, but the sites I did visit, most health and safety individuals, even of large organizations, get paid somewhere in the 60s, $64,000, $65,000 plus benefits. We're paying somewhat more than that. Again, I guess because we've taken an individual who is at a certain payroll threshold and we've seconded them. So it raises a question in my mind, have we, again, it sounds like a broken record, but have we looked at hiring a firm that could come in on a contractual basis for the length of time it would take to, they could come in, look at the audit, they would know what had to be done, where the voids are, and they could undertake it as a project. Because the flip side of that is that we are taking on another half-time position in the CAO mayor's office to replace the person that we've seconded. So at the end of that secondment, what do we do with that person who's in the half-time position? So there's a number of questions there, Mr. Chair. I put it out there to whatever staff want to speak to it.
CEO?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start with the response. Yes, we did look at that. WSIB did provide, I believe, an estimate of what it would take. The WSPS would provide an estimate, and that was our first reaction, was would it be, that would be the easiest thing, would just be to contract them to do that. Right. I don't have the number in front of me, but I can say that it was significantly higher, the cost to bring them in to implement this program than it would have been to do it the way we're proposing. So I can certainly provide that number. The second issue, I'll maybe defer to HR, but the idea is that the administrative assistant that would come into my office is actually an accommodation for an existing employee who is on mat leave that would come back, who wants to come back to work, but wants to come back in a part-time capacity. So we're able to accommodate that employee as well as second the existing employee to do the workplace health and safety issues. So yes, that has been looked at, and I'll defer to the HR director for any further comment.
Madam Director.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, I don't have anything to add. I'm in complete agreement with everything that you've said. I'm looking at the salaries. I don't know what sites you looked at, so again, it's, you know, certainly my experience with health and safety coordinators in the industry, I don't think that the salary this person is making is out of line with what we would find in the market, so, I'm just feeling confident we've made the right decision.
Councillor Kersey.
So the employee that we're accommodating, who is coming back off mat leave, was she a part-time employee and is stepping back into a part-time role, or was she a full-time employee that now doesn't want to go into a full-time role? And what are we going to do with her at the end of the secondment? What have we done with her old job?
Through you, Mr. Chair, please be assured that we had these conversations with this employee. So yes, she was a full-time employee who has chosen to come back part-time. She is absolutely well aware that her time in this position is contingent on the duration of the project, that as soon as the project ends, she'll be given notice. She is unsure after that if she wants to go to work. We've talked about if we had other openings at that time that we could talk to her about it, but there's no guarantees after that. And she is quite content with that. So we have done our due diligence to make sure that this is the arrangement that she's looking for.
Councillor Kersey.
So is she coming back as a contract employee, all of this spelled out in her contract, so that there's no going back and?
That's right.
Okay.
Okay, very helpful. So secondment, part-time, once the secondment's done, the part-time person is, with all due respect,
That's fine.
contract's
The
finished,
contract is over.
but there'll be
thank you for the
opportunities if she
service.
wishes to apply. Okay, that's good to know. Okay, so are we clear on that? Any other questions with respect to, or let me start with Councillor Kersey and I'll come back to you.
You could.
Or anybody.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm trying to find it here. It appears to me that there's been some more reorganization taking place here within Public Works. It appears that we've created a new department called beautification. Is that the case? And does that represent new employees? Is that going to represent new levels of management, et cetera, et cetera?
Through you, Mr. Chair. No, in 2015, we created facilities and beautification, so it was the joint merging of the two departments, facilities and beautification. Now we're just putting beautification back. I believe it was called Parks. When the Director of Public Works and myself met with our CAO back in, again, 2015, the name was changed, I believe, from Parks to beautification, but no, there's nothing new.
So no change in numbers, no change in management, supervision, nothing?
No. So again, so we currently have a supervisor of facilities and beautification because it's essentially one department that rolls up under our director or our manager of facilities and beautification. You'll see that there's the split out, which is why we're requesting a supervisor of facilities now, because we're splitting out facilities and beautification. If that's not approved, the position remains as one. We have one supervisor working out of our Tice Road operations, and then they just manage workload working out of Tice Road and working out of the PCC and other facilities.
By splitting them out, we do create a new position.
Which is the one that we've asked for, yes.
So that's part of the staff complement
It's part
request.
of the,
Right.
it's part of the three
Okay,
positions
okay.
that we've asked for.
Gotcha. Anybody else?
Non-specific,
You want to be on this particular
are
topic?
we on HR, this all we're on now,
Yeah.
or what? Are
Yeah.
we- Yeah, no.
But I know Councillor Ribia had a few more questions on each.
I do, and I'm going to need your help a little bit, I think, in determining where we discuss some of these items. There were some reference made to them in the charts, but I don't know whether that's part of our discussion around the operating
Can you
budget.
give me an
or
example of?
POTH, for example, Is that going to be a?
Off Street is
yeah,
on
that
capital.
that's a capital.
Capital.
Sulphur Springs would be the same, I would
Same
think.
thing.
Yeah.
Right. Help me with this one. I have a question. Well, it doesn't come out of the presentation because it wasn't there, so I won't talk to you about it now. There was an item in the presentation with respect to the airport, and I just want to clarify with regard to that. I think I'm wondering whether I misunderstood or whether the chart misunderstood the capital requirement by the airport. It's not really contingent upon the region taking up control and governance of the airport. It's really something that needs to be done, and the other is a completely separate issue. So just as we're going through that, I think it needs to be considered as a budget item as opposed to something contingent upon something
So it
else.
should be 18% and not 30. Charlotte just corrected me on that. So 18% of that
Yeah.
number is the town of Pelham's
Yeah,
portion.
we're
Requirement to pay to them.
we're a smaller player in that one, but
Yeah.
we nevertheless pay our share, which is also balanced by revenue. Just hastening to point out.
Any others?
On anything in the operating?
We'll get there. I did
Okay.
have one, no, but go ahead. No, go ahead. I was going to ask.
Well,
something
maybe
about-
Councillor Lane is.
Lane, did you have anything about HR?
Well, this is just on anything under the operating budget.
Yeah, I just had two questions under the HR related. Number one, and helping Nancy, having a seniors moment again. You said you showed the list of benefits costs, and you said there's a $42,000 reduction. Can you help me understand how did that reduction occur?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. So back in September, I meet with our benefits facilitator, Mosey, and they give us an estimate. So at that time, they estimated that we were gonna see a 7% increase in benefits, which is where the 42,000 came from. Just earlier today, actually, they sent me the document saying that the projected increase in benefits is actually -0.03. So we're gonna see about a $200 savings in benefits. So when I emailed them back, please, am I reading this correctly? And he said yes, and in fact, they're still continuing to work with our providers to try to get that number even better for us. So that 42,000 essentially, based on the proposals he's brought in.
So
today
no
is gonna-
premium increase in any of this, so basically it's stabilized. It's,
Status quo.
Right, and that number will come off. The 42 will decrease the amount that's requested.
the second question I had, and it's just a small, we can deal with. When I look at the chart for the facilities manager and all, not so much, I see line staff reporting to a manager, and I'm trying to understand that one there. I'm trying to understand, okay, explain this to me. You got a supervisor that, maybe it's my misunderstanding, like you got frontline people, am I wrong, tradesperson, custodian, they're reporting to the manager?
You're correct. Through you, Mr. Chair.
Why?
Again, as I had mentioned, that just in light of the situation that we're in now, we made some adjustments to our staffing ask. If this had been the full proposal that we wanted to, based on the pro forma, you would have seen another person in there that those folks would have reported to.
Streamline it.
Yeah. So there's a lot that's been edited for this year that I think we feel comfortable
Okay.
in presenting. But it just means that in future years to come, we're going to start.
You may have to adjust the organizational setup. Okay,
Yeah.
all right, and then getting back to, again, the benefits, appreciate that. Explain to me, or explain to us, just for, all our employees are covered 100% by our benefits carrier, correct?
All of our permanent full-time employees.
Covered. So there is no co-payment,
Correct,
all right? But we're one of the few that still does that.
correct.
So that's something that I want to just put in the hopper at some point that we need to look at, because I know that there are municipalities where that doesn't exist. There is a co-payment. I'm not asking you to do that now, but at some stage, I think that's something that we need to examine very closely, especially when the cost of benefits is right up there.
Through you,
Go
Mr. Chair,
ahead.
so if I may, as you recall in my last COW
Right.
presentation, I had mentioned that I was going out there and starting to look at our
Perfect.
benefits, and not necessarily to change our offerings, to see what we can do differently. And I do have some exciting things that I haven't had an opportunity to run by our CAO yet, but ways that we can definitely create some savings with no impact to our staff, so that they actually wouldn't have to pay into it. So I'm excited to share those, and hopefully those.
I'm looking forward to that. I think all of us will look forward to it, because
Yes.
it's always a question, you pay $1 in wages, how much do you pay in benefits? And I remember in my previous other side, that was a question that always came up. Okay, thank you on that. Any other, nothing else HR related organizationally wise? Councilor Lane?
This may be HR related. Actually, it's for clarification, if I
By all
might.
means.
I would like to know what the terminology for global salary allocation, what does that actually mean?
Madam Director, you want to take a stab at that, or Madam Treasurer?
Where's that?
Where is it?
Where was that?
It's on Schedule 6 of Public Works is one reference.
Schedule
Oh,
six
okay,
Public
oh, yeah,
Works.
okay, HR Director?
It's
Yeah,
referenced a
through you,
number of
Mr.
times.
Chair, it's, at the beginning of the year, because we're on a merit-based performance plan, we don't know where increases are gonna go into which department, that they're all just globally attributed to HR until we go through our annual merit performance and calibration, and then the funds will get distributed to the various departments based on the performance review of their people. So right now, globally, it's just under HR, but it's not all HR salaries.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Anything else? All right, now we'll open it up to general operating budget. Any other topics that?
You're going to start with-
I think this falls under the operating budget, and if it isn't, we'll have the discussion later on under capital, but I think it's the hall in Fenwick, the one that's used by the train club.
That would be capital.
Is that capital?
That's
Good,
capital.
we'll have that discussion later.
Okay, anybody else? Councilor Kersey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One thing we haven't done, and maybe we want to defer that until we look at the capital, but is the overall increase. It's projected at this point at 5%.
Right.
And are we, as a council, happy with a 5% increase, or would we rather be looking at something less than that? Because that could change the entire context of the discussion.
Comments? Councilor Lane?
Well, yeah, just to follow up on what Councilor Kersey is saying, do we have any quote idea what the region and or the school board might be coming along with, which would further impact quote a town increase?
Mr. Mayor?
The region is rated their reserves, so they got it to 2%. By rating the reserves.
So they've finalized their budget at 2%.
That's correct.
In education, we're still waiting.
And the education, I don't know if,
I could follow up on that.
it's not usually known until February.
Right. Okay, so Councilor Ribbiak, the comments on the 5% increase on the net operating budget?
Yeah, and just a codicil, if that's the right word, to Councilor Kersey's observation. I take a look at that 5%, and I think of that as kind of the scorecard and not the game. If everything in that budget is required, absolutely, and the number turns out to be 5%, then I guess it's going to be 5%. I think the real question is whether we think that what goes into that 5% is entirely necessary, or something that's going to be deferred. I would not want to see what the region has done, which is to have a 5% budget, but pretend it's lower by rating reserves, for example. So I'd be more interested in hearing about specific items that we think might be changed, which might have an impact on that 5%. 5% does sound high, but I'm not sure that 5% is the wrong number, depending on what goes into that 5%. So how we get there, I don't know, but that's certainly the way I feel about it.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. In addition to what councilors have stated, I think, first of all, the number is slightly lower because of what the HR director had stated in terms of the 42, so it's down to whatever that number is, 4.6 or 4.7, whatever. Somebody has that number, no doubt, and so we can get that when we further consider the budget. Yeah, I think Councilor Kersey said roughly every 100,000,
117,000 is 1%.
117 is 1%, so. Yeah, and I think, I agree, if we can go through the budget and see The other option is council could say, staff, show us what it would take to get to this level.
Yeah.
So those are the options, but I think, I mean, initially, I think we should probably look at the specific items and see if there's some things that can be adjusted or not, so.
All right, that's a very important question. Councilor Durley, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm looking at Schedule 16 under Public Works, and I think this falls under capital, but there's 3 or 4 spots where it's noted funding required and applying for grants and all that. The 5% includes something which is not including a grant. Am I correct in understanding this?
Yeah.
What is Schedule 16? Sorry.
Roads 07, 18, for example.
Capital?
It is capital, but this will contribute to the 5%, I believe. And we're looking at 3 things, and there's a $2.4 million
Right, yeah,
fund
so,
required Pelham Street road reconstruction. If we do receive a grant, that number's gonna go down?
no, it's the net. It's the net. So the $3.2 million request to transfer to reserve does not include the grant. It's what the town's portion is.
So if we don't get the grant, I think it's a question,
Well, if we don't get the grant, I don't know, how can we do the project? I think
It
it's,
replenishes the reserve if we make the transfer,
do that.
right?
No, go ahead, Councilor Christie.
Well, I'm just saying, if in our budget we adopt a transfer out of operating into capital, it's a transfer that we have said we want to be coming out of the levy and going into the reserves. If we don't do the project, it stays in the reserves. It helps to rebuild the reserve.
The cash will fall out.
If we don't get the grant, I suppose we could go back and revisit the item and say, okay, we want to reduce the transfer in. And that might impact the second taxes, draw on the taxes.
Okay, and what I'm looking at is the 5% will be affected in that particular case. So that 5% is
Yeah, so
really
you just
contingent
have to-
upon.
You just have to be careful with the impact of the capital, the transfer to reserve, because once you start decreasing the transfer to reserve, it's a permanent decrease in future years' budgets, because you're keeping that increase in operating. Do you see what I'm saying? So if you're deciding to take, suppose $3.2 million of transfer reserve, I'm gonna say it's, 2.5, that means that you now have permanently increased the operating budget by that difference, and you've decreased capital for future years. So you have to be careful with that, and that's my worry here. I agree with that. Because right now, the capital is being funded in year, and I need that cash.
And that's peculiar, through you, Mr. Chair, that is really affecting 2018 specifically, and will impact on other years in a different
It'll
manner?
impact other years if we reduce the capital transfer to reserve. Because then what you're saying is you're gonna absorb all of the increases in the operating budget to $590,000, and now I've decreased capital for futures. So in the future, I have less for capital, but now now my operating budget is now increased by that amount. So you have to be careful with that.
Okay.
Okay, Councilor Christie.
I'll be bold. I would much prefer to see the increase somewhere in the 3 to 3.5% range. Inflation is running at 2.8 to 3, somewhere in there. If we do less than that, like the region, we'll find ourselves in the boat that the region finds themselves in, where they're rating reserves to supplement their tax, and then they have no reserves to go forward, as we saw in the
Their
water
water,
wastewater
wastewater, yeah.
budget. That was a classic example, where they have a $77 million deficit annually. So we don't want to go there. We want to replenish our reserves. We want to rebuild our reserves after our building process. So I would not want to touch that, as our treasurer has said. But I still think we should try and target 3 or 3.5. I think that's a reasonable increase. It's keeping up with inflation. The most obvious thing that comes to my mind, and again, I'm not trying to pick on anybody, is we're adding bodies. So, for example, we split the beautification and the facilities, and we're gonna have a new supervisory position there. So I don't know how much that amounts to in terms of dollars in payroll and benefits, but if it's 60 or 80 or 100 grand, 100 is 1 point. We're pretty close.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we can absolutely go back if that's what council would like to do and not, because currently, as you say, the position right now is a joint position. As we've been working through this process over the last couple of years, by moving the staff there and having them supervised there, it makes sense for efficiencies, not only in getting work done, because the supervisor still ultimately becomes a working member of the team, but also as far as equipment and things like that goes. So we did take a lot of those costs into account. We can keep the position merged and keep that one supervisor. As I said, they run shifts, so sometimes that supervisor is working the Zamboni, sometimes they're working a lawnmower. We can do whatever you'd like to do. So yes, it'll be difficult, but your staff is certainly willing and able. If that's what the decision of council is, your staff will be able to pull it together.
All right, Mr. CAO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to add to that, council can obviously sets the tax rate as they see fit. The question at this point, from our point of view, is does the council want to maintain the current levels of service, or does council want to see a reduction in those levels of service? And I'll be quite blunt that our calculations have shown that this is the staffing and the labor requirements we have for what we currently own and operate and what is coming online. If council would like to see a reduction, we'll take that direction, and that's not a problem, but it will result in recommendation on reductions of service levels. Okay, so for example, if council wanted to say we would like to reduce our operating budget, we'll say fine, we'll take out sidewalk, snow clearing, and you can save X amount in labor, staff, costs, etc. That'll bring your tax rate down. But that again is an example of that would be taking a service away. So that's the caution that I would have from the administrative point of view for council, is that we've been very clear on our staffing needs, requirements moving into the future. If council doesn't agree with that recommendation, that's council's prerogative, but we will not have any alternative but to reduce service levels, which council would need to be aware of. So I'll just wait for council's direction on that point.
Okay, comments? Councilor Lane first, and then Councilor Christie, if you don't mind. Councilor Lane?
I want to thank Darren for what he just said, because I added on my note here, and one of the items was snow clearing. Is that something that the town wants to continue with as a service, knowing that we're building more and more subdivisions and there's more and more sidewalks, and that is only going to increase? And quite frankly, from the time it was initiated, I personally wasn't for it, and I'm wondering if it's the best use of dollars for the town, considering all that's going on. If people want their sidewalk cleared, they probably have to clean the driveway to get to the sidewalk, so cleaning the sidewalk is probably not a big deal in a lot of cases. So I think it's a luxury that we're paying probably close to $300,000, if I had to guess, for that. Is it something that we should be continuing? I don't know. Same thing applies for the little white bus running around. Is this the best use of our dollars for not being accessible to most people in the town at any rate? So,
Councilor Christie?
Well, Mr. Chair, just as a follow-up to our CAO's comment, maybe if we had that information, it would help us to know what it would look like. So if we say we'd feel much more comfortable at 3.5, then staff has some direction to go back and say, okay, we're going to massage this and we're going to come back, and we think 5 will maintain the level of service that we're at today, but if we drop it to 3.5, these are the gives. These are the things you could give up, and this is where the impact would be. Then we can make a rational, informed decision. I mean, to go by gut is not the way we should be doing business.
Go ahead,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Absolutely, and that would be what I would think would be the most rational approach, would be if council's overall direction was to say come back with something that says 3.5%, staff would go back and say, okay, in order to meet that, we would recommend this, and that would be the consequence of a reduction of service of whatever it was. Snow clearing was simply an example I used, not that I'm recommending that, but I think that would certainly be the repercussion, maybe that's the wrong word, but that would be the result of less than what we've asked or recommended would be reduction in service. The council needs just to understand that point, that if that's the direction, that's fine. But residents need to also understand that would mean less service in whatever area that we determine.
Thank you, Mr. CEO. Councilor Ribbiak.
I just wanted to maybe build on some of what Councillor Kersey and what the CEO has just said. I completely agree with Councillor Kersey that the gut is not the way to do it. It really needs to be the kind of systemic look that the CEO is talking about, so that we can look at the changes in the big picture. Trying to pick out one item on its own, there I think lies some real potential for problems, and there might be easier ways to get to where we want to get. And I think that part of what the CAO may need to take into consideration is some of what we're going to be saying later on as we go through the rest of this discussion
Right.
on this document. So,
Well, the bottom line is, if I may, I couldn't agree more with you. We need how could I say, a very comprehensive look at what the options and outcomes are of making the decisions to come to a certain target. And I would leave that in the hands of staff to bring back to us, rather than discussing obvious things, because you can turn around and go through a whole list of stuff there that's up there now and say, okay, and I'm being without prejudice, say, we're not going to hire any staff, period. We're just leaving it the way it is. We're taking on a major project this year. We have to be very clear in our minds on how that'll affect us and affect the ratepayers, affect us to be able to make sure we continue to deliver service. The flip side of that, on a positive side too, is if there's other ways of increasing revenue, then let's look at those. Then that's always been a case where sometimes these things change in revenues, or as the Madam Director showed in HR, some costs are reduced. So maybe as a staff direction, we'll put that on hold right now, and let's go through the capital budget if everyone's in agreement with that. And we'll look at having staff bring back we'll summarize after more information regarding the PCC, the target for the levy increase, and then now let's just turn any more on the operating budget before I shift?
Mr. Chair, let me talk about the model railway building, not in terms of capital, but in terms of operating, because you were talking a moment ago about revenues. And that's really what I want to talk about, the
Okay,
potential
so-
for revenue out of that.
Is that part of the the capital
Well-
budget? I don't know, I'm not,
It's revenues, so I'm assuming
It's operating, because
it's
it's not
operating.
part of capital.
there is,
There could be revenues there.
There could be.
I'll wait till the end, because there is one other item I want to make clear to everyone that we have to be very cautious of, but I'll leave that till the very end. Anyhow, let's talk about the capital budget and include in that the discussion with respect to,
Revenues? Let me just say what I'm going to say, and then.
I'm on the same boat and same line like that.
Yeah. I'm just looking, indeed, the item is in the capital budget, but the point that I want to make is with regard to the operating budget and
Using
potential revenues. And the fact of the matter is that the model railway building produces no revenue, as I understand it. And we were proposing a capital cost for this year and for several years
Yep.
to come that probably amounts to $100,000 or more, not counting reference to grants that are along the piece. I really think that we need to figure out whether or not there is some revenue potential in that building. We are currently subsidizing a club, of personal interest, to an extremely high level by not having any requirement for revenue, and we have a facility that may be producing revenues in some extent that isn't doing it. So it just seems to me that's one of those things that deserves a look at. We haven't been doing it for a long time, some 35 or 40 years, whatever it is that the club has been there. It's almost like habit. It's there. I think it requires a review, and if there's some potential for revenue to help offset the cost that it itself has, now that it's designated, and we want to look after it. But also just in general terms, you have a facility and it could be producing revenue and it's not. It frankly bothers me, and I think it probably bothers more than just me on this.
I agree.
On this council.
Yes. Also, at the charrettes, Mr. Chair, several comments were made about the potential revenues that aren't being realized from the Platform Tennis Club, the amount of money that's coming in. Many people who were members of this group in the past are saying that really it could produce a lot more revenue, and maybe that's worth looking into as well.
So on a general, the thing is, that what you're hearing is that we maximize the potential of all of our physical assets wherever possible to get, where there is no revenue, look at that. So that's part of our discussions. So that being said, can we now move on to the capital budget, or are you good with the operating budget? We'll have instructions at the end.
Good.
Okay, can we move on to capital budget? Madam Treasurer, please.
Okay, so the proposed capital projects. What this schedule shows here is, this is just a summary by the various departments, and the detail of the schedules are attached there. But just in quick summary here, what we have is the total capital request for 2018 is about $23 million, of which almost $17 million is the Pelham Community Center. So $6.4 million is the requested capital for the town, of which we're looking at $2.3 million of grants. One of the grants, $1.2 million of that grant, we still have to hear if we're going to receive it or not. I think the announcements are coming out next week for that grant. And then we've got some external contributions. The in-year reserve transfer is 3.2. We've got money coming from some of the obligatory reserves, which is the park reserve, and then we also have some DC and note debentures. So this is just a summary of where is the money coming from to fund the capital in year. So the first one is the information technology request, which is $245,000. The new item on this budget here there's a couple of new items. One is the fixed asset management software module of $120,000. This item here, we're looking at options to see if there's the Ontario Good Roads Association is offering a program, and we have been in discussion with them to see if we can piggyback on what they're working on. It looks like a pretty good program. The Municipal Finance Officers Association have now partnered with them, so they've got some good partnership. Ryerson University has partnered with them as well, and their focus is to support small municipalities in helping them to develop their fixed asset software system, and they also have a program for work orders. So if that's the case, then that $120,000 would come off if that program meets our needs, but we're in the process right now of assessing that. The next one is the annual equipment PSAB additions and replacements. This is just regular items that we have. Innovation technology, $50,000. This is just a fund that the IT department has for technology for in-year requests that we have. Voice activation system, $15,000. This is customer service. What it would do is it would help people calling into the town. They can ask for the person's name, or they can ask for the department, and it'll direct them right away, as opposed to having to wait for someone to answer the phone. And sometimes the person's busy and they can't answer right away, so it'll provide better customer service for people. They don't have to know who the person is. They could just say, the tax clerk, and the call would automatically go to Victoria, the tax clerk. Website enhancements of $30,000. This is just enhancements to our website. So I'm going to stop now after each one and ask questions. I think this is easier right now.
That's easier that way.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Madam Treasurer.
Okay.
Councilor Kersey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to propose that we stop after each one and make it a little
Yep,
more
yep.
simplified. First question, Madam Treasurer. We're proposing a transfer from operating to reserves of, or to capital, 3.2 and change. How does that compare to last year's transfer? Is it in line? We typically have added a little bit each year as
0.6
we've
last
gone.
year. I think last year was 3.6 if I'm correct. The number has gone down.
It has gone down?
Charlotte's just going to verify that.
Okay, that'd be great.
I'm pretty sure, I think it's 3.6.
Well, just while we're looking that up, I really think it's important that we even if we don't want to go ahead with some capital projects, that we target a number in around that range. Because what we don't spend stays in the reserves and help to rebuild the reserves as we develop our reserve policy and bring that forward. So that's first comment. Second question I had was the website enhancements. We have put an awful lot of money into that website. And it's still a difficult website, not as user-friendly as it should be. Would it be worthwhile taking a look at doing a new website that's more efficient, more user-friendly? It's easier for our staff to access and update data, as opposed to throwing another $30,000 into website enhancements this year. Maybe we use this year to look at developing a new website, looking at different providers. I don't know, I'm just putting it out there, but
Yeah, so I'll have to get back to you on that. I mean, I don't know if there's anyone else that can respond to that about the website. I know when I talked to Mike, the IT manager, I think it was working on content. It was earmarked to make it better, but we'll take your comments back and get back to you and report back.
Thank you. Okay. Any other questions on IT, capital? Hearing none, let's move on.
Okay, the next one is the fire and bylaw services. Just a couple of things, the replacement of the bunker gear, which is a requirement, and the radio equipment is the ongoing amount that, as I mentioned earlier, it's our portion of that 300 something plus of the radio equipment, so that's that 2018's portion of the radio. So there was other items on here, and the fire chief was able to defer them to 2019. So this is just minimum requirements.
Okay, any questions on that? Let's move on. Town
Okay,
facilities?
Town facilities. I don't know if it makes more sense for me just to, Andrew, if you want to talk about the facilities? I think it's just, okay, thank you.
Madam Director?
Sure, through you, Mr. Chair. Going through them one by one, the concrete project is the standing repair budget for concrete facilities that we carry every year. This used to be absorbed into the roads concrete, but we broke it out to show more accurately what we spend on facilities concrete maintenance. This would be staircases, various pads, bench pads, for new park benches and such. They run a few $1,000s a pad, so we carry that. The second one was changed from $12,000 to $35,000 based on the heritage designation to do the window replacement. That at the model railway building, that's a requirement, a recommendation from the condition assessment that was done in 2014. So we're slowly chipping away at those critical items that were listed, and it was listed as being critical in 2016. The Tice Road is a continuation also from the condition assessment about some door repairs, insulation. The North Bay, which is the bay where the mechanic works, has some ongoing issues with leakage and insulation, so that's again taken directly from the condition assessment. The can't see what this one is. Looks like the field got cut off, so I'll pull up the actual budget and see what that one is. The first line looks to be deleted. I don't know if, Charlotte, you've got the actual.
Municipal building.
Which line?
The last roof piece, maybe that's what that is. So the municipal building roof replacement has been broken into sections. Is that what that is? So this is the section over the planning end of the building. That's the last piece. The section over my office was done this year. So I've had a lot of leaks since I joined, and we've been chipping away. So this would be the last remaining roof section to be done at the town hall. We have received this grant money already, or this award of this grant. This is some small upgrades here to the elevator and the interior doors to help our accessibility. And this would be covered partially by grant money, the $9,000, which has already been okayed. We have some remaining furniture upgrades to do. Tice Road, the history here has been at the arena on Tice Road that furniture that is done its life here at Town Hall gets retired down to those facilities. And unfortunately, it means that they've inherited a lot of broken or non-functioning pieces. We've covered everything that we can through working ourselves this year, building the furniture ourselves and into the capital rental project. So this is the remaining pieces that need to be done. Playground, our monthly inspections of playground, that's one of the tasks that the facilities people do that the Director of HR was alluding to earlier. They do playground maintenance, and in our regular inspections, they'll do minor repairs. There are some playgrounds that need a little bit more significant work for replacement based on a risk management, and because of their ticket cost, they were put into a capital request. The Fenwick Lions concession canopy at Centennial Park, you remember this from last year, it was deferred. This is partially to be enhanced with contribution from the Lions, and hopes to also be perhaps eligible for grant money. And lastly, the reconfiguration of soccer fields at Harold Black Park. This is a revenue item and a service level because of the configuration of the fields and the changes in regulations. This was a request that came through from the user group, that it would actually keep them safer, stop the balls from going on haste, allow them to use the park more flexibly for more games of more different varieties that meet the regulation rather than the way they're configured now.
Thank you, Madam Director. Any comments or questions on this? Hearing none? Sorry, Councilor Geary, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The model railway building, is there not some kind of an agreement in place with them that they're responsible for some maintenance items as well as the town? And I'm just wondering if the full amount should be for the town.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the agreement is a lease from 1974, and the agreement is that they do the minor maintenance work. Typically, the number, although it's not listed in the lease, is sort of anything less than $3,000. So the capital work, in terms of the maintenance of the building, falls on the town, and the minor repairs have fallen in the past to the group.
So,
Echoing what Councilor Ribbiak said earlier, there probably should be some kind of updating in, if there's an exclusive user of that building, there should be some other conditions put in place, but that's something that perhaps staff can have a look at and bring a recommendation to us.
So that would be probably a re-examination of our lease arrangements with them that would, I imagine, articulate.
Coming.
Mr. Chair, it
That's
is coming.
coming.
That was
That's
an
right.
outstanding item from the decision about the heritage designation,
Okay.
that we would revisit the lease.
Okay, good. Anything further on that? Councilor Kersey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So is it my understanding, through you to our treasurer, that if we do not get the grant, those windows are not replaced? Because it says grant after it.
That would be my understanding. If there's the grant, because it's not part of the reserves.
I'm not aware of any grant.
Okay?
Sorry,
Oh,
through you,
Madam Director?
Mr. Chair, I'm not aware of any grant for that project.
Okay, so why is it under other?
Maybe you can help clarify that, because if there's no grant, then.
Oh, okay, so sorry about that. We'll follow up on that.
Councilor Kersey, go ahead.
Just as a follow-up to that, during the time when the folks that had Mary Lamb and a couple of other folks were interested in looking at the building and the inside and the outside, I was there with Kim and we walked around the building and looked at it. And the one fellow who is actually an expert in restoration of these types of buildings suggested that these windows, for all intents and purposes, are as good as a replacement window. They need new putty and a new paint job and a painting of the storm windows, but that probably could be done for $5,000 as opposed to $35,000. I'm just putting it out there as an alternative for perhaps, you guys could take a look at that.
Madam Director?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the recommendation comes directly from the third-party assessment, which was the $12,000 to replace the windows. We took that $12,000 and approached the company that did our old Pelham Town Hall heritage-type replacement to get that budget adjusted. So we simply translated the recommendation to replace the windows. Absolutely, if the preference is to do that type of maintenance work to extend the life rather than replace them, that can be considered.
I think that's fair to say, to look at that consideration, considering the amount of money that's we're looking at now. Councillor Brebiak?
Thank you. And just to build on what Councillor Kirsty said, if it's carried out over a couple of years, it might be less than $3,000 per year, in which case it won't come to us at all.
True. Okay. Councillor Kersey.
Another thing that pops in my mind here, and I'm not questioning this year's allocations, but for future understanding, and when I look through the future budgets, and I didn't spend a whole lot of time on that, I'm concerned about the Tice Road Operations Center and the amount of money that's projected to be spent on that operations center over the next 5 years is, well, down to 2023. I think there's a $500,000 addition added to go on to that building. So I wonder if our director would be able to bring us a separate report that shows the plan that's in place for the utilization of that building and how those monies are going to be expended over the next 5 years, so that we have an understanding. You've obviously put a plan together. I think it would be helpful for this council and future councils to understand that going forward. Would that be possible?
Is that, Madam Director?
Through you, Mr. Chair, absolutely. It's on my to-do list. You did ask for this earlier in
Yeah, we
2017. The reason I haven't yet was because we were waiting to see how this would unfold with the PCC and how the staffing
Right.
move and shift would happen, to get a better feel on what we really think this future structure is going to look
Right.
like. With that, we thought we'd fold in the life cycle analysis that was done as part of that condition assessment and say, okay, if this is home and what are the other options for home, then where can we go? The $500,000 renovation is simply a translation from the development charge bylaw, where we flagged some money through the development charges to support growth-related changes that are needed in that operations yard because of the increase from development.
Thank you, Councillor Kersey.
Could that report also include showing how the reportables that are at the arena could be utilized in that site, and if they are intended to be used in that site, and if not, what our plans are with them, because that's a significant amount of money that's sitting there that
No, we spent.
we either liquidate it or we utilize it. So I'd like to see what we're going to do with those.
Okay. Understood. Carry on.
Okay, the next
Park
one is
facilities.
Park facilities,
Any,
public works.
any
The next few ones are yours.
Sure. Through you, Mr. Chair, the Wayland Heights and the third one down, Residences at Lookout Park Development. These are both the final development of the park areas and the development behind the fire hall, the main fire hall, north of Highway 20. So these are parks that have been slated through development to be fully developed with playgrounds, and you'll recall the playground workshop that you had. This was actually, these have, the Wayland Heights has already been postponed. It was meant to be designed in 2017 to try to capture some efficiencies. We were proposing to do a design build this year and combine the second park with that. We do get calls very regularly from residents in the area asking when they'll be able to use those facilities. Ash tree is the continuing saga of the ash tree removals. We approached council in 2015 saying it would probably be 3 to 5 years, and so here we are. And MSSP reconfiguration, this is a smaller ask, but because of the amount, we put it into capital because we are having some near misses with traffic crossing the grass to get behind the skateboard area. So it's really to set up some quarry stones and physical barriers to stop people from trying to drive through and putting kids at risk. And the last is what was talked about earlier, some permanent fencing to enhance the Thursday night experience and help to relieve staff of some of the maintenance required on the temporary fencing that we have here now.
Comments or questions on that? Councillor Kersey, and then Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I like what we're doing here. I just was wondering, with respect to the design build of these new parks, are we thinking that we might want to incorporate the Back to Nature parks that we did the charrette on and the program? Is that what's planned, or could you comment on that, please?
All right.
Through you, Mr. Chair, absolutely. That's the direction that we are hoping to go in.
Great.
Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, just about those parks. Where's the funding? It says coming from reserves, but I thought some of that's coming from the parkland dedication. Do you know that?
Yeah, these ones here are coming from part of the $3.2 million allocation.
Okay. But I'd be keen to know how much of the parkland dedication can be used for that, because each of those homes in that area paid into the parkland dedication.
So we're okay with that?
Well, I don't know.
I don't know.
Should it be under other or not? In terms of the second park, the Park 03, that's the larger one that's along, I'm trying to think of the name of the road, that isn't Marlene Stewart Street, yeah. That's further down Hay Street North. I know the folks that are on Abbott, et cetera, and even the businesses that are behind on 20, the Lazy Loon, et cetera, are keen on the park, the first one, to be done, which is smaller, and I think we're hoping for a connection between the development and the commercial area. I just wondered if, do two parks in 1 year, I don't know that we're going to get to it. So, I mean, maybe designing and building the one and then designing the other. I don't know if it's something that we can look at.
Maybe.
Or I just want to hear a little bit more about, so the entire contract would be to design, build two parks in 2018 with this area. Is that what the idea is?
Through Mr. Chair, yes, that's correct, that we thought that we might find some significant efficiencies having one contractor mobilize once to do two parks.
And in terms of the design, are we hoping that, as we've done with other parks, that the neighborhoods are involved in that process?
Sure, yeah.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, we are going to be working with the neighborhoods in design, similar to the workshop as we went through.
Yeah.
And the same basis. And the idea was to contract both of them at the same time, complete one, and then work with the other side of the subdivision and the residents in the larger park area to develop that, which would be later in the year.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Lane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the permanent fencing for Peace Park, I was just curious as to what type of fencing that is going to be looked at for that particular area. Is it similar to the white fencing that's temporary, or chain link fence?
Who wants to?
Through you, Mr. Chair, this particular item is basically due to the Thursday night events and the amount of people that we have, and to accommodate the licensed area and the side of the, we have an issue with the plaza parking lot side, And with the families and the children playing and rolling down the hill, to accommodate the amount of people, we would be fencing, permanent fencing from the Professional Arts Building down to the sidewalk in front of the library, and only that area. And this price was for a cast iron decorative fence, so that it would look nice, it would be permanent, and it'd be sturdy enough to handle the hill area and the climbing that normally goes on on that side.
Rolling out of the park.
Yes.
Okay.
Councilor Ribbiak? Thank you, Councilor Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Another question with regard to Peace Park permanent fencing. I understood that to mean a replacement of the temporary fencing, but that's not the case, is it, based on your description?
Through you, Mr. Chair, what will happen is the temporary fencing will now be used to divide off at the top of the hill prior to going down to the band shell area. So it's basically still delineating the licensed area. That's what the portable fencing will be used for. Therefore, you can use it for other events, Summerfest, you can move the fence and so forth.
Councilor Ribbiak?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question was going to be whether this was going to offset some rental costs, but obviously that's not the case. May I ask this, though? Do we own this temporary fencing, or do we rent it, or how does that work?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we own the portable fencing, and other service clubs have used the portable fencing for other events as well, so when we're not using it, so we actually
Good.
own it.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, just, I'm cautious of time, but just to quickly, I know at one point we were looking at redesigning Peace Park. So we put this fencing in permanently, then that sort of is on the shelf. I mean, I know we had looked a few years ago at reconfiguring the park itself. So are we still proceeding on that, or are we gonna leave that? We're gonna leave it, Mr. Seaver?
We're not planning on proceeding with
Okay.
with the redesign at this point.
Thank you, that's all I need to know. Carry on, next.
One is the roads.
The roads. Madam Director?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have our biannual bridge and culvert inspection. It's a legislative requirement that we contract out. We've done a small reduction to our annual Christmas decoration replacements. That's a constant replenishing of our decorations based on condition and age. We have the concrete repair and replacement. That's primarily sidewalk replacements there. We have the culvert replacement program, which is the large diameter road cross culverts that can't be done internally by staff. We try to do as many as we can inside, but some of them have to be sent out based on our equipment needs. The engineering budget is the annual engineering ask that covers our traffic studies, road counts, and other road support that's needed from an engineering perspective. The funding related cycling initiative has been granted, and that's straight out of our active transportation master plan to incorporate better improved cycling signage throughout the town. The big $2.392 million ask is the Pelham Street Storm and Road Reconstruction Project that we've heard delegations over the years about. The designs are complete, the environmental compliance approvals are in, and now we are throwing around how to proceed with that project. The road base and surface repair program budget continues and hasn't changed, and that covers larger than pothole repairs, large patches and such that are done, or also includes restoration of road from water main repairs or cross culverts. There is a, looks like this is cut short as well, a road rehab budget of $413,000 that includes several legs of road requiring major repair based on condition. We had a condition assessment done 2 years ago, and it's also in preparation for continuing to maintain our cycling routes and race routes. The ditching program continues as well with the $110,000 to do our rural and urban ditching maintenance. We have our ongoing sign replacement program, which is cycling out our signs based on age and reflectivity. We have stormwater facility maintenance. This is a new ask. We have some of our older stormwater ponds that need some major maintenance in terms of dredging and removing sediment and repairing some significant erosion that's been observed in the last few inspections. Our ongoing streetlight and traffic signal maintenance costs. We've put in a request to do the Sulphur Spring consultant engineering request for design options related to all of the repairs on the Sulphur Spring road failures. And that would include options about road closure permanently, options about lane realignment, whatever might be options for us. We did do the request for information as directed and have had no success so far. We've had 4 firms refuse. And finally, we have the traffic safety and intersection operations review. It's a consulting fee as well with some specific intersections that we're targeting based on safety. This in the past was a practice that I understand that we did regular traffic safety reviews through the town on specific areas. And we wanted to pick that up again to make sure we're staying ahead of these, especially in light of the growth that we are seeing. And lastly is a request through the Active Transportation Committee for a specific counter for cyclists, because we find on funding applications we don't have hard data to say the number of cyclists that are using certain routes.
Thank you, Madam Engineer. Comments, questions? Councillor Gribiak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have, Mr. Chair, my apologies to the Mayor. I have two items that I want to talk about, and they're both roads, and they're both in the rural area. One is Sulphur Springs, and the other is Poth, which has been relegated to 2019. I just want to talk about both of those. I'm really pleased that we're thinking about putting aside money to do an engineering study of Sulphur Spring. Obviously, there's a real challenge there, and we need to know what we want to do. I guess the part of it that's of concern to me, as it is with Poth, is that it contemplates that we're going to continue to keep it closed for the foreseeable future. And I'm not sure that that's entirely acceptable. I find it very, very difficult. I don't know what can be done, and maybe nothing can be done, but I would like to make a shot at give it a shot to see whether Sulphur Spring might receive some minimal treatment that would allow at least people in the area to access their properties such as they need to from time to time. The only access that's there is Sulphur Spring. I don't know what the ultimate decision is going to be with regard to Sulphur Spring. I'm not sure whether the ultimate decision at the end of the day might be, we've got to close it because it's impractical to have a road there, and people with property have to find some internal means of accessing parts of it. But in the meantime, we have what we have, and we ought to, I think, live up to some degree of responsibility, perhaps, to keep that road open at least for local light use so that people can access their road. And similarly with regard to Poth, the idea that we propose $1 million or more in 2019 to do a repair of Poth is suggestive that we are going to leave Poth closed until that happens. I'm just wondering whether it might be whether it's even possible to look at how that road might be kept open at some minimal level of operation, perhaps for emergency access only, local access only, light access only, and perhaps doing that effectively might allow us to put the big expense off several more years and maybe take some pressure off that situation. Poth bothers me because although there are very few people living there and traffic is light, nevertheless it's important to access people. I know that at least one brief occasion, and I recognize that it was brief, Poth was closed to the north of people who were living there. So now that they were locked off both ends. Quickly repaired by the town, no argument about that. But nevertheless, it indicates the risk to people living there of having that closed off. Poth, I don't think, is a road that we're ever going to abandon. I think we're going to have to repair it at some point. But for now, is there some way we can find of keeping it open minimally, at least for emergency access, if nothing else, and maybe think of the bigger repair for further down the road? I don't know whether that's going to pick up support, but I'd really like to give that a shot.
Madam Engineer, let's start with Sulphur Springs, and then we'll talk about Poth.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure what else I can offer. Sulphur Spring cannot be reopened safely. If we wanted to consider opening for light traffic or light duty traffic or anything along those lines, one, we still assume a liability in opening it, and two, how do you police that? And if someone disobeys whatever that requirement is, the town still remains wholly responsible for whatever happens there. The same goes for Poth. I think we've talked about this. We haven't, through our consultants, found an option to open it temporarily without assuming risk. So if council would like to assume that risk, then options shift. I think we would have trouble finding any consultant to do a design or to give instructions to a contractor to do a repair that contradicts legislation. I'm not too sure what else I can offer.
Okay, thank you.
What's the legislation?
Prepare, please. Please, I'd ask you to refrain, please, out of respect.
Freedom of information.
Please,
Yeah, I know.
please,
Bullshit.
please.
I would eject that.
I really, Mr. Mayor?
Thank you. We are talking about Sulphur Spring, and I just want to hear a little bit more about this RFI, the request for information that did not yield any results for firms. Can we just hear a little bit more about what that request entailed?
Through you, Mr. Chair, an RFI typically is done when you are engaged with a contractor, let's say all construction, and you do a request for information to say, we'd like to get some details on if we asked for this change in the contract, what would that cost and what is that information? In this case, it was requested of us to do an RFI to request of consulting firms to offer us engineering advice on what could be possible with that situation without compensation. So we laid out what it was done by email. It was addressed to local and some not so local firms to explain the situation, explain what the problem is, explain what information would be available to them, and to ask if they would be able to provide us any information, insight, or recommendations without compensation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anything further?
With regard to Sulphur Spring or Poth?
I think to both of them. I think, yes, if I may, we have discussed this. And also, as we mentioned to you, both the mayor and myself met with the Ministry of Transportation officials on this. And there is an element of risk, that's true. But it's a decision that if the municipal corporation makes to decide to repair, then that's a risk that we assume. So that's something that we need to talk about, because when you see the closures here and that, I just, we're kind of left kind of scratching our heads. But nonetheless, go ahead, Councilor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What I'm hearing is that anything less than that full repair is going to leave us with a liability that we're willing to accept or not accept.
That's correct.
And it seems to me that what we haven't seen is perhaps a slate of 1 or 2 or 3 options, and with some sense of what the probability and extent of the risk would be with respect to each of those, and what the attendant costs would be of each of those. It seems to me that we've been offered kind of one option only, and it's a good option. There's no question. It provides for everything that's required of the road, but it's extremely expensive for the location. Maybe it has to be. But it also means the road needs to be closed until we find the money to do it. And there may be some other steps that we're willing to take, but we don't know what they are. So I wonder whether we might undertake some sort of study in short order to bring us some options and allow us to look at what else we might be able to do on POTH.
First, is that possible? Because if not,
Change the date.
Madam.
Mr. Chair, I struggle with this one because you would be asking for recommendations for a repair that is not in accordance with provincial and federal legislation. Whether we could get an idea of how big the risk is based on the option, it would be unfamiliar territory. We could perhaps do some research on what has been done in the past and what has resulted.
I'm not asking, I think we're clear to you that we would not ask you, as we heard ourselves, to do anything that would be non-compliant that would put us, but there was discretion there that was given to us, that we could make a move if we wanted to, but I think sort of the research along those lines would be helpful. Councillor Kersey.
Mr. Chair, all I was going to add to the conversation is when we had the geotech specialist here and the soil expert here, there were some pretty pointed questions asked of him. In that he basically said the soil that is there has been there 1,000 years. It hasn't changed significantly in the 40 years that culvert has been in place. What has changed perhaps is the legislation around that.
That's what it has.
But, and I specifically asked him what the risk of a catastrophic failure is, where somebody's going to fall into the creek. And it was negligible. Probably would never happen. So we beat around this bush a long time.
Right.
It's come down to, we either take the advice of our director and the experts, or we make a business decision and say, that culvert's been there for 43 years, it's serviced the community for 43 years, the traffic volumes are very small. Direct staff to give us a cost breakdown on putting in new culverts, take the old ones out, put new ones in. And we put it, if we really want to try and limit our risk in some way, put up signs that limit the load. I know that those signs can be ignored, but at least we could point to that as having taken a step to try and limit our liability. I think that's what it boils down to. Either that or we move on and we follow the direction.
Yeah, we got to make a decision. So what's the pleasure of, we want to look at
cost.
and research some possible options, notwithstanding the fact we are not putting you in jeopardy, but it's the corporation that would be taking the risk. If in fact something came back that said, we'll go ahead and do this work. Members of council?
Which one are we talking about?
Well, both sulfur, well, Plow Street in particular.
Let's do one at a time.
Pardon me?
Let's do one at a time.
We'll do one at a time. Let's do Plow first.
I'll ask, Mr. Chair, I'll put it on the table that we ask staff to bring back a report itemizing the cost to do a like for like. Take out the existing culverts, put 2 new culverts back in there.
Okay,
At least then we have some numbers.
very good. Madam?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we have those numbers. That
Okay,
was the
great.
original budget estimate of 618,000, 130 of which is the cost of the culverts themselves. The rest of the breakdown is in the mobilization of a contractor It's the removal of the existing culverts, it's the excavation, it's the stone, it's the redirecting of the water during the construction. That was the estimate that was originally carried forward, and I think it still continues in the 20-year, based on current construction from 2016.
Councilor Christie?
So was that based on a design-build quote from some contracting firms, or was that something that staff internally put together to have a budget number to work to?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that was directly from contracting firms, based on a design that we had used at Sawmill. Originally, when the original thoughts were about having replacements. The Sawmill approach of concrete changed over. You might remember the consultant came in and talked about the 4 options for replacing structures, and culvert steel, uncoated steel being the cheapest at the $618,000. That would include engineering, so you could take off some of that amount for engineering, say about $30,000. But the rest is based on contractor estimates from the designs that they have.
Pleasure, Councilor Ribia.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to the director for reminding us that that's there. So $600,000 as opposed to $1 million plus. Obviously, there's attraction to that. The other question is, would we put it into this year's budget, or would we wait? So I would like to propose that we go down that road and do it sooner than postpone the much more expensive option. That would be my preference. Again, it's up to council to make a decision.
Anyone else on this? Councilor Lane.
I just, thank you. Through the Madam Director, if in fact this job was done in the winter time, would that alleviate the need to have to divert water and various things like that if everything is frozen up? Because I honestly don't see this as being a big, long job. Like, I don't see us taking weeks to do this particular job, digging out a culvert and putting in new culverts. So I'm just wondering, if it was done in winter, would we alleviate anything by not having to divert water if everything's frozen up?
Madam Director.
Sure, through you, Mr. Chair, we did explore that option. The cost of the excavation took over the savings from doing it the offset with the redirection. POF is a municipal drain, so there is an option there to take advantage of a dry season. It means you need some flexibility with the contractor, but there are some windows there. But we did explore the winter work when we were quoting out for the 20-year forecast, and we encountered some complications with permitting and with the extra excavation costs for working with frozen ground.
Okay, so what am I hearing from council, that you want staff to bring back that particular option for our consideration as part of these deliberations for this capital budget? I don't think we're going to have enough time to finish this tonight. I'm cognizant that we're only 18 minutes away from curfew, so we still got other things that we need to deal with and get clarified. So I'm not looking at Madam Clerk, whether there's a, pardon me?
You can continue the meeting at a
Or-
later date.
Or we can continue the meeting at a later date. It's up to you. We still got, all right, let's see what we get done here in the next 17 minutes. So we'll ask staff to bring back a report on the option on Poth Street for consideration on the 2018 capital budget.
Thank you.
Okay? All right, Madam Treasurer, next is the fleet. These are vehicles.
Mr. Chair,
$42,000.
I had an issue in the
Sorry, I
road
apologize.
stuff. Yeah.
I apologize. Go ahead.
The stormwater facility maintenance issue, specifically this one is Timber Creek, and definitely it has to be fixed at $70,000. Now, to me, it's long overdue, because this was brought to my attention
Right.
4 or 5 years ago that there was some problems there. And I think if we could look in the future for some sort of a maintenance schedule where we can put $1,000 or $2,000 a year into something, it's going to save us $70,000 when a thing actually breaks down. Now, like I say, it was brought to my attention. As a matter of fact, I was confronted by several of the residents of Timber Creek who are in vicinity of this, saying there is a problem, and staff who was with us in the past said it's working properly, so we're not going to do anything. And, you know, the thing is, it's probably still working properly, but now we have to spend $70,000 in order to fix it. This seems to be a large expenditure, and I'm looking around some other stormwater facility, stormwater management ponds in town, and I'm looking that they're in much the same condition from an amateur standpoint. I'm not an engineer, but I look at that and I compare it to what's at Timber Creek, and I say, this one's bigger than Timber Creek, so if Timber Creek gets to the point where it needs this at 70,000, the other one's gonna be 100,000. So if we could spend a little bit of money each year to make sure everything's maintained, it could save us a big ticket item when it finally does break down.
Madam Engineer?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there are actually two projects in there, a pond at the north end of Station Street and Timber Creek. There's two major projects being proposed there. And as well, we've already adjusted the 20-year forecast going forward to include a small storm pond maintenance allowance. I believe we put it in about every 5 years to say once we start to see, you don't tend to see it show up year to year, but over several years. So we did put in, going forward, smaller amounts to get ahead of this, exactly that point.
Glad to hear that, because it's, like you say, a big chunk, a big ticket item. Every 10 years is, you know, could be mitigated with a little bit of money every couple of years. Thank you.
On with you. I don't want to continue.
The next
Thank
one.
you. Next one is, we'll go as far as we can before you continue, Madam Treasurer. We'll get to as close as we can to 10, and we'll pick up the balance of the operating and capital budget after council on Monday.
Okay.
If all of my colleagues are in agreement, you don't have to do that, and I've got confirmation from the CEO. So let's get through what we can here in the next 14 minutes. This is the fleet.
Pass over to the Director of Public Works.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. We had a significant change in our approach to fleet that's been shown here, and in the 20-year forecast, we've responded to council's request to consider leasing. So for any equipment where we know there are lease or rental options, we've converted to that in light of conserving that capital output. So there was a significant change with ripples through the 20-year forecast for these amounts. So many of these, as you'll see, are identified either as leases or rentals. The first being a replacement of the dump box pickup truck that's used in beautification for all our garden maintenance. The second is the Red Circles project from 2017 for the small
No.
fast
No,
forward.
I'm going to try and make it easier for you. The list is in front of you. Councillors, if you wish to, you don't have to detail. If any questions about any of these items? Councillor Lane.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. My question's in regards to the second and third items on the list, and that's in addition to the fleet of two small SUVs, and I'm questioning why are we building the fleet with SUVs, and what is the actual need for these new vehicles?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the building vehicle was a project that was red circled and then approved in 2017, but deferred because of the discussions that went on back and forth. It was approved as a purchase and then changed to a lease. Then because of the time of year, it was deferred to 2018. So this was based on the need identified through the building department, as the CBO currently drives his own vehicle. And that is covered fully by building revenues.
By building revenue.
So it's not impacting.
Should be another.
Okay,
Bottom line.
Mr. Mayor, go ahead.
Just to that, should that be in the other category as opposed to fleet reserve?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think we've talked about this before, in that the the money, I'm going to defer to you, but the money for the fleet for building is transferred in from building, but goes into the fleet reserve. So it appears to be coming from the reserve funded by levy, but its original source was from building revenue.
Okay, we'll follow up on that.
Okay. Any other further, so you want to leave it in there, or what?
Well, I really haven't got an answer why we need 2 small SUVs added to the town's fleet. Why do they need to be SUVs? Why can't they be small vehicles at partial cost? You know, that's-
So that was to answer the first one. This was identified by building as their need to add fleet. The second is because of the changes to the structure and no longer having the facilities and beautification team able to share vehicles because they're no longer working out of the same location. So this is some of the efficiencies lost in breaking apart that group. We've had the group that's moving to Tice Road, which is beautification, take their equipment with them. So the facilities team remains a team that has to maintain all of the parks and all of the facilities and fire halls. So with this remains a need for them to get around. Even with this, there is still significant sharing of vehicles. This isn't a dedicated vehicle. And the need for the SUV is because there's often park work, trail work, off-road work, park work that is done related to the nature of the job that requires, typically in the past it's been a pickup to load loads of lumber, equipment, supplies, paint, whatever it might be. We've downsized that to a much more reasonably costed vehicle, knowing that we can try to time the scheduling of the transporting larger loads with an available pickup.
So, Lang?
I'd be interested to see what a small pickup truck would be in relation to this price, or even a small vehicle. I just think these small SUVs, although they say they're small, they're rather expensive sometimes, and can be shown by $8,000 a year for a lease. So that's all I would question, whether there's a true need for that particular expense.
So that is the cumulative cost for the year, and then there's the monthly lease, obviously, so, and it's about $700 a month.
Yeah, over, yeah.
Over.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the small compact pickups aren't available anymore, those sort of really compact little Rangers that we used to buy.
Right.
The SUV is a good alternative. It offers the all-wheel drive as opposed to going to an all-wheel drive passenger vehicle. We did price out these options when we considered the lease, but this one was the most reasonable and offered still the capability for the needs it would be serving.
Anything further? I do know that when you go out to RFP, there are good deals on leasing vehicles, so you may not be paying that, you may be paying less. So the question is still well taken, Councillor Lane, as to the rationalization for using these kinds of vehicles. So leave it in there. I'm going to ask that, if you all agree, we're less than 8 minutes away. I'd like to kind of adjourn at this point, unless you want to continue on for the next 8 minutes, and we'll reconvene on the 15th of January, right after council. So are you good with that? I need a motion. Go ahead. Go ahead,
Just to
Councillor
finish up
Cruz.
leases, I just have one.
Go ahead. No.
The leases, through you, Mr. Chair, the leases that we have, Madam Director, for the heavy equipment, are they all in, or do they include maintenance parts? All of that, if they break down, are they replaced
Right.
by the lessor?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the heavy equipment tends to be covered through seasonal rentals rather than leases. We don't have a commitment past one season. And yes, they're covered with repairs and maintenance or replacement. If the unit goes down, we are responsible for oil changes and that type of thing.
Okay, any further questions on the leases? Anything further? I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved by Councilor Ribbiak, and we don't need,
Motion to recess.
motion to recess. And we'll
Motion to
continue
recess.
on Monday. Hearing none, this meeting is recessed.